It's interesting that Dan says that it's discrimination. It strikes me that all of the businesses that are currently boycotting Indiana are saying that they want to run their businesses in accordance with their values, and so they're free to boycott Indiana. Right. Why is it the 70-year-old grandmother can't be free to run her business in accordance with her value?
Ryan Anderson of the Heritage Foundation on MSNBC responding to Dan Savage, who equated Indiana's religious liberty law to Jim Crow laws of the 20th century. This, of course, as we get news that Arkansas has followed in Indiana's footsteps, passing its own religious freedom bill. For more on this story, we're joined now by John Zogby, senior analyst for Zogby Analytics and author of the book First Globals: Understanding, Managing, and Unleashing Our Millennial Generation. Skyping in from Utica, New York this morning. John, it's great to have you. Arkansas, immediately following the uproar in Indiana, passes that bill. Are you surprised about that?
No, not particularly. If Governor Hutchinson signs the bill, that'll be 20 states. And, obviously mainly red states, although surprisingly, Indiana flips and flops.
Well, it's interesting because if I'm not mistaken, among those 20, John, the state of Connecticut. And Connecticut's governor was out there criticizing Mike Pence. So a lot of states have this. There's a federal statute that was signed into law before I went to Congress back in 1993, signed by Bill Clinton, introduced by Chuck Schumer. What's different now? Why all this intolerance on a bill that's supposed to promote religious freedom and tolerance?
The GLBT rights movement has flourished. Obviously, not only in the last 10 years, but particularly in the last 3 or 4 years, it's gotten a tremendous boost in the polls as well as in the battle for intensity. And it itself is on a winning streak and gets its message out. The problem that Indiana faces is the bumper sticker war. Anytime a governor or elected official has to come out the very next day and say, but it's not what you think, or you're misinterpreting, you're losing the bumper sticker war. That doesn't fit on a bumper sticker, as well as intolerance, anti-gay, anti-civil rights. And so it's that sort of thing that's changed.
Before we get to Mike Pence and his reaction on it, and we understand that political maxim, if you're explaining, you're losing, how big a role sympathetic media coverage to the gay agenda play in this in your mind?
Well, sure. To be sure, I don't know if ultimately over the long haul, the media makes people's decisions. Remember, Tim Russert and Sam Donaldson years ago said, Bill Clinton will be out of the White House in 72 hours, So the media agenda doesn't always work. However, in this instance, for a few days anyway, there's clearly a sympathy, and that sympathy is on the LGBT side, and they are getting the favorable coverage, while those who back this legislation are left to defending it, even before most Americans even know much about it.
A minute 30 remains in this segment, John. We're seeing pictures of my old congressional colleague, Mike Pence, as he offered his announcement yesterday asking the General Assembly to send to his desk in expedited fashion some clarifying language ridding any notion that there is discrimination in the bill. Does this adversely affect Mike Pence and any national political ambitions he might have?
Well, Mike Pence is showing up at 0 in the polls right now, and so that's very hard to project, especially, when there's 17, 18 other names. His name has been bandied about, but it hasn't connected yet, and he may be a hero to conservatives, although he may lose his hero status to conservatives. But Republicans have to remember they have to win a general election too, and right now they're losing the word war.
Well, there has always been a challenge to that, I can say, as someone who has been in broadcasting and then served in Congress, to return to broadcasting. But that's why it's good we have outlets like Newsmax TV. And that's why it's good we have you, John Zogby, to explain what's behind the numbers. We're going to ask you to hang in there from your location in Utica, New York. And we will be back to talk more about polls, politics, principles, and priorities. Think there's enough alliteration there? There's more ahead as America's Forum continues here on Newsmax TV.
The CEO of Angie's List, a local company that does business nationwide, backed out of expansion plans in Indiana and tied it to this bill. The head of Angie's List, who made the announcement, was Mitch Daniels, campaign manager just 10 years ago. And his argument is that the Republican Party had this argument 10 years ago when they had a choice between a social conservative and a more business conservative, and they went with the more business conservative.
Matthew Tully of the Indianapolis Star on MSNBC discussing the backlash following Indiana's passage of that religious freedom bill, and he talked about a difference that occurred even within the ranks of Republicans. Meantime, Democrat consultant David Axelrod argues a social conservative will never again be able to win a general election for the presidency. Then again, you got to remember, Axelrod doesn't want to see a Republican win. At any rate, let's continue our conversation with John Zogby, senior analyst for Zogby Analytics and author of the book First Globals: Understanding, Managing, and Unleashing Our Millennial Generation. Speaking of millennials, John, gay marriage is an issue that has seen a shift toward acceptance in a relatively short period of time. First, let's take a look at the latest CNN ORC poll from this February. And that poll shows that now 63% of respondents support the constitutional right for gays and lesbians to marry someone of the same sex. That level of support up from 2010, when the same poll showed that 49% of respondents supported that right, so that would have been a majority of 51 against it. And then back in 2009, where 55% opposed gay marriage, with 45% supporting it. Why do you think we have seen this change in just 6 years' time?
There's a couple of things. You know, one is voters coming to the grips with the fact that there are more issues that are of greater importance than who people sleep with and who they choose to marry. The second is the growing number of millennials, not only in our society, where they now match the number of baby boomers, the largest age cohort ever, but also are a growing number of the electorate. Those who are millennials born from 1979 forward will be about 30% of the electorate in just 2024. And that's what leads us, I think, to the next serious question about Republicans winning national elections. Republicans win when they depress the turnout of young people. Young people are disillusioned with the Democrats. They're disillusioned with liberals, disillusioned in many ways with government. But when they're given a reason to vote, particularly to vote against someone or against a political party, their numbers go up in the electorate, as they did in 2008 and 2012. So GOP is cruising for a bruising in 2016 on this issue if it hangs out there.
And yet you take a look at another issue, and that is abortion, and we are seeing numbers change there. For example, polling shows a significant decline in past years when it comes to the number of people who consider themselves pro-choice. So on that issue, it appears millennials are moving to the right. I believe. You tell me if that's the case.
I wouldn't say particularly moving to the right. What I would say is that they are more situational and less hardened. Millennials don't like abortion, and so they're situational, saying in effect, don't give us a blanket policy across the board. You tell us the situation, we'll tell you if it's legitimate or not legitimate, which is, in my view anyway, a pretty sophisticated response. But JD, remember, that issue, at least now, is not on the table. What is on the table is, by a lot of appearances, a law that appears to put of course, this is the the religious rights law, a law that seems to be putting the GOP on the defensive.
Well, again, as we've always said about politics, if you're explaining, you're losing. The caveat being Richard Neustadt, who said a chief executive has the right to educate, but that's once elected to office, not in the midst of a campaign situation. John Zogby, the author of First Global's Understanding, Managing, and Unleashing Our Millennial Generation, our thanks to you, and America's Forum will continue right